All right, welcome back to the Jimmy Duster Music Channel. Back with my friends, the Incorrigible Luddite and Dr. Going Blind Kelley. And got a great show for you. If you're new to the channel, make sure you like and subscribe. Hit the notifications button so you can be alerted. And welcome. We're three friends that live in different parts of the country now. And we like to get together every couple of weeks and talk about music. So great topic for us tonight. Our 5 favorite heavy metal and hard rock guitarists. Now, this is not the best or whatever. You know, it's not Rolling Stones top 100 guitarists of all time. This is people we like to listen to, people that we enjoy, people that have some sort of a meaning to us. And we'd be interested to hear who you like. So make sure you comment. Tell us who your top 5 are. We would love to hear from you. Why don't we tell you what? I usually go last. I'll go first tonight, and then we'll go Luddite and Dr. Kelley. How's that?
I think that's great because I think Shannon is the biggest metal guy here. So I think, have him go last. So.
I think that's fair enough. We'll start with our number 5, go around, and then 4, and go in order till we get to number 1, and then we'll have some time at the end for honorable mentions. Sound good to you guys?
Let's do it.
All right. My number 5, the first of, when I get through my list of 5 and my honorable mentions, the 3 greatest debut albums in history are all going to be represented. My number 5 pick, Ronnie Montrose. And my favorite selection by him is from the Edgar Winter Group. They Only Come Out at Night album.
Did he play on that?
Yes, he did.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And, of course, this is, in my humble opinion, the greatest debut album of all time. We purposely decided not to include anybody with the name of Jimi, J-I-M-I, or Eddie in our list. And I would argue that if it wasn't for Ronnie Montrose, there would be no Eddie Van Halen. Eddie got a lot from Ronnie's playing. Ronnie was a great player. He played with Van Morrison, Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams. So, you know, a lot of varieties of styles. Of course, the Edgar Winter Group, his own band Montrose.
Yeah, he played with Sammy Hagar, right? Sammy Hagar was in Montrose? Is that right?
Yeah, Sammy Hagar's in Montrose.
That's what I thought. Yeah, look at that. He looks almost like Lindsey Buckingham on that Buckingham Nicks cover.
Yeah, and any shirtless album back is worthy of recognition in my book. Just always been a fan of Ronnie Montrose, and you know, that's an album I'll put on once a month. That Montrose album, and actually the Edgar Winter album is a new selection. A little vinyl store I visited in Virginia when I was down there this past week. I picked that one up down there, and great album too. But if you haven't, check out Ronnie's band Gamma, his fusion band that he had for a while. A lot of great stuff on there. So that's my number 5 pick, Mr. Ronnie Montrose.
Okay.
What you got?
That was a great pick, actually. And I did not know he played with the Edgar Winter Group. No clue. That's interesting.
I think that was the only. I think he did a later album with them, like in the 90s too. But just those 2 albums.
Okay, my number 5 is probably, along with my number 4, I think, actually all 5 of my picks, I think, are to some degree underrated. Although one of them is godlike amongst his fans. They're all a bit underrated, I think, to the mainstream, okay? But my number 5 is going to be Vernon Reid of Living Colour.
Good choice.
This guy of my 5 picks, and this is Time's Up, by the way, and as you can see, if you're in Columbus, Ohio, I got this at Used Kids Records years ago. I don't know if that place is still there or not, but it was always a great place to buy CDs and albums. I only have Time's Up. The first one, of course, has Cult of Personality, which was their big hit. I like that first album, but it's this one, Time's Up, that's really their masterpiece, in my opinion. This has got Type on it, which is one of the best riffs I've ever heard. It is a powerful riff. The thing that's so cool about Vernon Reid is he's very jazz influenced, and you can hear it in his playing. He was also very influenced by One of my other in the top 5, which I'll get to later, but he can really kind of combine metal, hard rock, punk, jazz, calypso, flamenco, even blues. He mixes all these different styles, and it really works. The reason he's not higher, he could arguably be a little bit higher, but he just doesn't have the body of work. I mean, I don't know how many albums Living Colour had, maybe 3 or 4. But it's really the only first 2, especially this one, Time's Up, that are really revered and important, but really sensational player, can play jazz licks. Again, some of their stuff is very heavy. They even add a little thrash at times. But there's almost some prog influences in what they do. But I would recommend anyone who wants to hear a really diversified guitarist, listen to this album, Time's Up. Vernon Reed's my number 5.
Good choice. Dr. Kelley.
All right, so Jim gets an A+ for his first win. Jeff gets an A. So I took some liberties. I decided to go with guys that I think are great guitarists that don't get mentioned very often. Some do, some don't. But I ruled people out if I felt like they were quote unquote too famous, because I wasn't going to sit here and talk about Ace Frehley for a half an hour. I could have done it, but I wasn't going to do it. So I went down a different route, because it's kind of like when you have 3 kids and somebody goes, well, which one's your favorite? You know, it kind of depends on the day. And that's kind of where I'm at. Now, I don't think the Montrose album is the best debut ever, but it's way up there. That's a great album. So I'm going to start off, and like I said, I'm going to go down a different path. My first one is somebody who's known much more as a singer, but that's Tom Keefer from Cinderella. I love the blues guitar. I love slide guitar. He does both exceptionally well. I think to Jeff's point, Cinderella has like 5 albums and probably will never be a 6th one. But even Tom's solo album that came out a couple years ago is really, really good. He could, they actually got on Letterman, which was pretty sweet for him. But yeah, it's more of a blues-based thing. And I think, if you go back to the MTV videos and stuff like that and watch them, if you can get around the way people were dressed, I think even in the videos it was portrayed more that Jeff was the lead guitarist, but he isn't. If you see them live, it's Tom and Tom alone, lead singing, the guitar, and he does it both exceptionally well. And yeah, I think I put him on this list, 1, because most of the time people don't think about him as a guitarist, 2, because I think he's a great guitarist, and 3, just a fantastic performer. I kind of vacillated. Some guys I put on the list more so because I like them live, even more so than on album. Some I like on album more than live. In Keefer's case, I really like both, but I really do like the blues style he plays in, and I do like the way Cinderella changes it up, and a lot of their songs go in many, many, many different styles. Plus, I wanted to stay in my wheelhouse more tonight than I did last time.
I like some of their stuff, Shannon. I actually like. I'm not as big of a fan of their first record, which is kind of their hard rock record, right? I like "Don't Want You Got Till You're Gone." That's a good song. That's a pretty good song. There's a nice emotional vibe to that track, but I think it's the third record. I don't know what it's called. Is it Long Cold Winter?
Heartbreak Station.
Okay, the third record is the one that I think
Cold Winter was number 2.
That was number 2. I think it's a record, and I've heard some of their stuff. I think the third one is the one that I like the most. I like that they actually might do Exile on Main Street style better than the Stones.
Yeah, it's good stuff, and it's one of those things that I like Cinderella. I liked the first album when it came out, but I came to love them after seeing them multiple times through, I'd say the 2000s.
They remind me of the Stones a lot.
Yeah.
But heavier, like a heavier version of the Stones, kind of like Aerosmith in that sense. But yeah, that was a good choice. I actually
and I can sit here and go, I was at the last ever Cinderella show. So hey.
Wow.
Shannon and I, we already mentioned we saw Cinderella open up for Bon Jovi. That was a good time.
Yeah. Yeah, great choice, Shannon. I agree with you. I struggled with narrowing this list down to 5. That's probably why I got about 40 honorable mentions on here. But so I just kind of went with 5 people that some people will know, some people won't, and hopefully I can just open people's eyes to some more people. So my number 4, we said no Jimi Hendrix on our list. So I went with a gentleman who allegedly was visited by the spirit of Jimi Hendrix in during an acid trip. And
wow,
Mr. Frank Marino.
Wow.
From Mahogany Rush. This is my favorite album of theirs, Tales of the Unexpected. Just a great album. Sister Change, All Along the Watchtower, Norwegian Wood, so a couple of covers on there. Tales of the Unexpected. If you haven't checked this album out, his playing is just fantastic. And if you haven't checked out Frank Marino, this is a last 5 years edition of my list. I knew who Frank Marino was, but had never listened to much prior to the last 5 years. And he's obviously entered my top 5 now at number 4. So Frank Marino.
Great story about Jimi Hendrix and the acid trip. Man,
yeah, I don't know if there's any truth to that story or if it's one of those rumors.
Oh, no, I'm sure it happened.
If it really happened, it's
no, yeah. I think it really happened.
Let's hope it did.
And that reminds me of another story that somebody I forgot off my honorable mention list. So, all right, back to you, Luddite.
This is my most controversial pick because a lot of people are going to say, this guy, he's certainly not metal, obviously, but some people would question whether he's hard rock. I think he is. And I base this upon the body of work on the 6 albums that he's most famous for. Anything that happened after the frontman passed away doesn't really count. And my number 4, again, I argue that he can be considered a hard rock, and I do consider him hard rock, and I'll explain why, is Mr. Robbie Krieger of the Doors. And this is Morrison Hotel. This is the 5th record by the Doors, and this is the record of their 6 records. This is the one that can be viewed, and I think Jim might agree with me on this. This record can be viewed as a hard rock record. Mm-hmm. This one here. The other 5, probably not, but there's songs on every record that are going to qualify as hard rock. One, proto metal. I'll explain. If we go back to the debut, in 1967, there was probably nothing that really sounded like a Break On Through coming out of your speakers. That song is definitely a hard rock song. It would be a hard rock song if it came out today. It's probably the only song on the record really like that, but that's a rockin' song with a great riff. We go to the second record, and also the end, even though it's more of a hypnotic track, it has some heavy passages on near the end, of that song, kind of the end of the improv part. The second record, Strange Days, is probably all in all the record that doesn't really have anything that I would categorize as hard rock, other than perhaps When the Music's Over, the other epic. Again, there's some pretty heavy guitar bits in that song. Getting towards the end of the song, the Doors had a tendency to go from kind of melodic to kind of heavy in these epics, and that was done in When the Music's Over also. The third record has a couple songs that are definitely proto metal. Spanish Caravan, for starters. It's obviously I think it's a flamenco inspired piece, but when the guitar gets electric about 2/3 of the way through the song, that riff is kind of metal if you really listen to it. 5 to 1 is practically a metal song for its time. 5 to 1 is considered a proto-metal song on that record, probably the heaviest Doors track. We get to Soft Parade. Wild Child is a hard rock blues workout. It sounds a lot like stuff that Led Zeppelin was going to do on Physical Graffiti, except for Robbie Krieger is a better slide guitar player than Jimmy Page, in my humble opinion. He's my favorite slide player of all time, rock slide player, bar none. Something about the way he plays the slide. Jim Morrison said the same thing. He said, I want you to play slide on every single song. he didn't oblige, played on probably a third of the songs, but he has a way of using the slide sometimes in a hard rock way, in a rock way, in an atmospheric way. He really, kind of mixes it up, but a hell of a slide player. My favorite slide player. Then you get to this one. This is the hard rock record through and through with Roadhouse Blues. Obviously, Land Ho, great riff, pretty heavy riff in that song. Waiting for the Sun, which is my favorite Doors song of all time. As hypnotic as it is, it's really hypnotic. It's got some heavy guitar passages that go through the song that kind of accentuate what Ray Manzarek was doing. Then you've also got You Make Me Real. There's a lot of hard rockin' songs on this record. Then the last record, L.A. Woman, La America is definitely a hard rock song without any question. Almost sounds kind of like Sabbath Light. So I think he definitely qualifies as a hard rock player. Barely. But since he is one of my favorite guitarists of all time, he did make this list. My number 4 is Robbie Krieger of the Doors.
Good choice. All right, Dr. Kelley, your number 4.
Yeah, and I think I almost left Keefer off because I'm like, it's not really hard rock or metal enough. But
that's kind of the same thing.
But yeah, took some liberties. So number 4 is more of just what I've experienced live, and that's Tracy Guns from LA Guns. He also he also was in Brides of Destruction with Nikki Sixx in the mid 2000s. Did a couple records with them. There's some punk influence stuff there. But really, for me, it's Tracy. It's all about the live element. Because I've seen Tracy countless times, and I'm guessing it's always good. It's always right on. He favors the Les Paul a little bit, as does Keefer. And being an Ace Frehley person, I like the Les Paul sound. I think the thing for me that when I was putting this list together and why I came back to him was because at one point in time there were 2 LA Guns on the road, 2 different versions. The lead singer had one version, Tracy had another version, and I went to go see the Tracy version, and Ralph Saenz, or I don't know how he pronounces his name. He's actually Michael Starr now in Steel Panther. But he was singing for LA Guns at the time. He also was a member of the Atomic Punks, a famous Van Halen cover band. And so when he was singing for LA Guns, of course, they played Van Halen's song that night. And I just remember being completely blown away because Tracy just completely nailed it. And the other piece with Tracy is my 2 interactions with Tracy. Sometimes people are nice, and sometimes people are rock star nice, and just kind of there. But he's genuinely been a great guy to me the 2 times that I've talked to him for, I don't want to say length. Well, 10, 15-minute conversations, and just an insanely nice guy and just a great guitarist. And again, it's far more based upon the live stuff. Although I do really, really love the guitar work in Over the Edge from the 3rd album. I think that song is absolutely phenomenal. So there's number 4.
Good pick.
You guys are mentioning people I need to explore a little more. So, all right, we're up to our number 3s, right? I thought I had this stuff in order, but apparently one. My number 3 is somebody I've talked about before on this show. Part of Finley for a while. Played with Coliseum 2, which was a fusion project that he did. A lot of stuff with Greg Lake. That's Mr. Gary Moore. This is an album, EDM, great power trio with Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce, along with Gary Moore. So, real blues-based, Cream sounding. They almost do Cream better than Cream. Great album. And my favorite of his solo albums, Corridors of Power from 1982. It was on our 1982 show. I talked about this album. One of my favorites of the year. Just me, this guy is just the best, has the best guitar tone of anyone. You know, I discovered him when he was in his blues period, where he started doing a bunch of blues albums and was playing by then, and then went back and started listening to a lot of his Fender stuff. And just a real creamy tone. You almost can't explain it, but it's just one of those it almost puts you in the mood. It's one of those albums. When I put on a Gary Moore album, it puts me in the mood to pick up my guitar and play. That'd be a good line for a song. But so my number 3, Mr. Gary Moore, rest in peace.
Yeah. Okay. So I gotta share my Gary Moore story. I know where I discovered Gary Moore, and I think it was Wednesday nights at midnight on QFM 96 when we were in high school. They had like the metal shop or something like that, and they played an hour of hard rock and heavy metal songs from midnight to 1 a.m. So I would stay up, of course, with the cassette player and hit record, and they played Gary Moore. I was just absolutely blown away. Yeah. And that's how I found Gary Moore. I remember it. I could probably figure out what the song was, but I don't remember which one it was off the top of my head.
Maybe like Over the Hills and Far Away? Or...
No. I'd have to look into it because But I just remember that's where it came from.
And he played in Thin Lizzy, right?
Yeah, for a while.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yep. And some great YouTube videos of Gary Moore, too. If you're ever poking around, just the emotion he puts into his playing is just incredible. So.
I figured you were going to pick him. So
yeah.
Am I up?
You're up.
Number 3, and I actually dragged out one of their albums that isn't necessarily a hard rock album. It has some elements of hard rock, but my number 3, I actually like this cover a lot, is going to be none other than Alex Lifeson of Rush. And I picked Power Windows out because I love the cover for one. I think that the guy's name, I think, is Neil Cunningham, I believe, on this cover. I think he now runs a bookshop or record store in Toronto, maybe. Alex Lifeson is very underrated. He doesn't get the credit, I think, being in the same band with Geddy Lee, who is arguably the greatest bass player I've ever heard, arguably. Neil Peart, arguably the greatest drummer I've ever heard. I mean, these guys get so much credit, and deservedly so, but Alex sometimes gets kind of forgotten. I think anyone, though, who literally listens to music knows how great of a guitar player he is. At the very beginning, I mentioned this in the Rush episode. I don't like the first record, but, from Fly By Night onward, he really takes off. Interesting hard rock player with great tone. When he starts to get progressive, he, kind of incorporates some influence from Steve Hackett. Mm-hmm. And maybe Steve Howe, both of those guys a little bit, maybe a little David Gilmour. But then in the 80s, as we get into the mid-80s, into the synth era, he starts to develop these almost soaring leads that are really very, very laden in effects, right? And I really like that. Very great with arpeggios as well. Very versatile guitar player. And one of my favorite Alex Lifeson guitar pieces is actually... There's a couple on this record. One is Mystic Rhythms, which is just really delicate touch. It actually reminds me a lot of something that my favorite band of all time might have done. I'm not going to mention their name, but it kind of sounds like them, to be quite honest. And also on this one, Marathon is another song with this soaring lead, but very atmospheric guitar player. So he could do the heavier stuff. He could do the atmospheric stuff. He was great with effects. So many great solos, La Villa Strangiato, The Trees, obviously 2112. I mean, then we get into the 80s and you've got great solos on stuff like Red Barchetta. That's a favorite solo of mine from Moving Pictures. Also Witch Hunt. Then even in the synth era, he's still, a lot of soaring leads that are very atmospheric with great arpeggios. Number 3 for me, the underrated Alex Lifeson of Rush.
Yeah, I agree. I got Alex on my honorable mentions list. I was hoping you were going to mention him tonight.
My number 3.
The way he went there's different periods of Alex Lifeson, all different styles. You know, it started out with the huge power chord riffs, and then into that mid '80s atmospheric stuff.
Love it.
And then you know, back into some more riff based in the '90s. And great choice.
The riffs were kind of gone for quite some time. There really aren't a lot of riffs in between Signals and Counterparts. The riffs come back on Counterparts.
Yeah.
Yep. But before Counterparts, you got to go all the way back to Moving Pictures. That was about 10 years where he really was not riff based. But even in those 10 years, there's some just great guitar work on stuff like Marathon. I mentioned Mystic Rhythms. I love the solo on Subdivisions. He's a very tasty player. Great texture. Texture.
Good descriptions. All right. Going blind.
Yeah. I mean, you can't say anything bad about any of the guys and their ability in Rush. You just can't do it. Except for the second guy. Anyways, yeah, okay. And continuing my theme of more under the radar stuff, Frank Gannon from Tesla is my number 3. And some of the people as I was going through this, I was thinking, and you guys have mentioned a few times, different styles and different ways he did things. Tesla kind of is all over the board, has all different styles of music, heavy, straight rock, and continues to do it to this day. The intro to Love Song, he self-admittedly says that he ripped off the idea from D from Randy Rhoads. So that's really cool and really, really different. And then when you get into his solo work, when Tesla disbanded for 4 or 5 years, he had a band called Moondog Maine, which was a more of a 38 special countrified kind of music, you know, two rock for country, 2 country for rock. But the title track on that's Turn Up the Radio or Turn It Up, something like that. It's not Turn Up the Radio, that's Autograph. But it's a really, really great song, super catchy, and a completely different style from Tesla. And then his solo album that came out not long ago it's just another element to his playing. And then again, when you layer that over the number of times that I've seen Tesla, which is arguably my second favorite band, you know, I've seen Tesla. I'm one of the rare people, I think, that saw Tesla as a 4-piece. When Tommy Skeoch left the band, they were in the midst or just getting ready to tour, and they went out as a 4-piece. So all of a sudden, songs that are designed for 2 guitars, he's trying to cover both parts. But I remember it being a very, very good show. It was the Odeon. It was the mid-'90s, so it was super lightly, and it was right before they broke up, and super lightly attended just due to the time. And then I saw them as recently as a Veterans Day last November, to Columbus to see them again, because I try to catch them as much as I humanly possibly can, because I just like them that much.
I think I saw them with you as well. I think I saw them open up for David Lee Roth. I think that was with you.
That was on the Mechanical Resonance, the very first album. Open up for David Lee Roth. We had a nice time at that show.
I used to love Little Susie. That's God, was that prophetic or what? But
instead of going into stories about the show, I'll just put this up and just let it go, because they might run something beyond PG-13.
Little Susie's on the up.
Yeah.
I used to like that. That sounded like it could have came right out of the 70s. I mean, I used to think it was a cover, actually. It sounded like somewhat like a 70s song. So they were always, I think they were mislabeled as like a glam metal band, because they're like a hard rock band from the 70s, really, right?
Yeah. And it's evolved over the years into more of the straight ahead rock. But again, just showing, I mean, because the first album, especially for the time when it came out, was more metal, and even the second album is really quite heavy too. But the thing about them, and getting off the guitar part, well, I like the 2 guitarists, and I like the trading the solos that they did, because I like trading solos again. Kiss, Judas Priest, Tesla. I like it when there's two really great guitarists and they trade. Well, I guess I probably shouldn't say really great because guitarists right in the same, because Paul Stanley's a good guitarist, but I wouldn't say great guitarist. But I do like the trades, and Frank's really good, and yeah, I can't say enough good things. Is somebody else that I've talked to on a few occasions. He's not as cool as their drummer Troy Luccketta, but he's a good guy. And he's not as cool as Jeff, their lead singer, but he's a good guy.
Tesla's cool.
I had a feeling you were going to mention him in your list, and I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I would say out of my okay, so the guys in Tesla, Troy's my favorite, the drummer. That he was fantastic. Jeff is great, their lead singer, a great guy. Brian is their bassist, who is their business guy. I like him because he was very direct with me and asking me very pointed questions like what do you think of this album compared to, say, Mechanical Resonance, when I was backstage with him. And I'm like, oh, it's a great question. And I said, I think this album's better from start to finish. And he's like, yeah, a lot of people are telling me that. I go, I do. I think there's a couple weak ones on the first album. And I said, I don't think there's any weak ones on this one. But I had a nice long conversation with him. And Frank tends to be a little more he's been a little more cautious when I've been around. But I don't blame him. He just doesn't know me, and I'm some fan.
Good pick.
Good. All right, number 2, back to me here. I started out with an American, a Canadian, and an Irishman, and now I'm going with a Brit. And in my opinion, this is probably one of my 2, maybe controversial picks, but I definitely think this guy qualifies as hard rock. My favorite, hasn't always been my favorite of the 3 former Yardbirds guys, but has become my favorite over the last 10 years. The guy is just a magician with a guitar in his hand, plays without a pick. His fingers and the whammy bar just makes it sound so vocal-like in the qualities. That, of course, is the master.
I knew you were going to say Beck and not Page or Clapton. I knew it.
Yep. Clapton has long been my favorite guitar player, but I think when we're talking about hard rock, I think Mr. Beck qualifies a little bit more than what Mr. Clapton does. And this album in particular, this just rocks beginning to end. He played with the Yardbirds, played with the Jeff Beck group, played with literally everybody over the years.
Rod Stewart was in the Jeff Beck group, right? Was it
Rod Stewart was in the Jeff Beck group. Rod sings on this album. The Beck Bogert Apathy album just rocks beginning to end. Even like Guitar Shop, the instrumental album that Jeff Beck did probably, 25, 30 years ago now. Just a fantastic album. And I saw him in concert here 4 years ago, I think it was. Down in Cincinnati with a great show with Ann Wilson and John Bonham's sister opened up.
Oh, wow.
So, Ann Wilson, Jeff Beck, and Paul Rogers were the main performers on that bill. And it was a great concert. And the guy's just a master. I mean, what more can you say about Jeff Beck?
Jeff Beck, great. And we're gonna get 2 Rod Stewart references. We got the first one. We got one coming later again. Oh,
another Rod Stewart reference,
yes.
Huh?
Wow. Well, I've heard that. I don't know if you agree with this, Jim, but I've heard that the first Led Zeppelin album, was really, really inspired by that first Jeff Beck group album. That Rod Stewart. I think Rod Stewart was a singer on that, and Rod Stewart certainly never did another record like that again. I don't think he did, but
very blues based, and
it was pretty heavy, right? The first Jeff Beck group album, and I guess I don't think Led Zeppelin stole anything from them, but I think the idea of what they were doing is what inspired Jimmy Page to do what he wanted to do with Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, other than probably Willie Dixon songs or something that were stolen anyway. So
I think Page and Beck are pretty good friends, I think.
Yeah.
Whereas
all 3 of those guys are good friends.
Ooh, I don't think Clapton is really friends with Page. I don't think those guys are really that fond of each other.
Really?
It doesn't seem like Eric Clapton's friends with anybody.
Yeah, he's not a very nice guy.
He's
Lowry,
kind of a
Lowry,
recluse. I saw him in. This has been probably 8-10 years ago now. I saw him in the Kroger in Canal, Winchester.
Weird. I would almost say that's surreal.
It was. It was very.
And I don't like to use the word surreal because it's so overused, folks. Seriously.
Yeah.
It's like the most overused word in the English language because it's
Of
usually
course.
what you see. It really, when you say surreal, it's really not surreal. But seeing Eric Clapton at a Kroger's in Canal, Winchester is indeed surreal.
Yeah, and of course he makes his home here in Columbus now. So
I've heard that. My number 2.
all right, number 2.
The other guy is really underrated. I think he's more underrated than Alex Lifeson. This guy's really underrated. He's overshadowed by, of course, the vocalist and performer that he is known for playing for. And I know you know I'm going to pick, Jim. My number 2 is none other than Mick Ronson. And this is Aladdin Sane. This is definitely a hard rock record. You can call it glam if you want, okay? But let's see what's Watch That Man is a hard rock song. Panic in Detroit is very rocking. It's one of the greatest outros ever. Kind of like a wah-wah outro, very heavy psychedelic outro on Panic in Detroit. Always love that outro. Cracked Actor, heavy, really. These are rockin' songs. All over this record, there's 3 or 4 really hard rockin' songs on Aladdin Sane. But the one that's, you might also call it proto-metal, is, of course, The Man Who Sold the World. This is the famous, well, it's not the famous, this is the kit cover, folks. The most coveted one, of course, is the drag cover. The UK drag cover with Bowie in the front is one of the most valuable records anyone could ever find. It did not sell well in the UK at the time, didn't sell in the States at all. But this record has often been characterized as an early heavy metal record. In the heaviness quotient, The Man Who Sold the World kind of sits somewhere in between Led Zeppelin 2 and the first Black Sabbath record. It's definitely heavier than Led Zeppelin 2. No question. You've got, the width of a circle. Jeez. Sounds like it could have came right off the Black Sabbath record, guitar-wise, the first Sabbath record. Also, probably the heaviest Bowie song, She Shook Cold, which sounds like Tony Iommi, but it's got like a Hendrix coven into it. It's fantastic. Of course, Bowie's great on these too. What a team that David Bowie and Mick Ronson were. But I should say 3 of the 4 records that he plays on with Bowie, starting with this one, The Man Who Sold the World, and going up to, of course, Aladdin Sane, and also Ziggy Stardust can qualify as a hard rock record too. The only one of the 4 records that he played on that isn't going to qualify as a hard rock record is Hunky Dory. Yeah. That one's not. That's more of a singer-songwriter exercise for Bowie. But so many great solos by Ronson throughout the course of this 4-album run. Moon Age Daydream off Ziggy Stardust. Doesn't get any better than that. Ziggy Stardust itself. I mentioned Panic in Detroit, which is one of my favorite guitar pieces of all time. She Shook Me Cold and Width of a Circle off The Man Who Sold the World. Fabulous guitar player, highly, highly underrated. Big influence on metal and hard rock, and he certainly qualifies as a hard rock player in my book. Number 2 for me, Mick Ronson.
A good choice. Mick played with a cocked wah-wah pedal a lot of times, where he would just leave it open to add in a bunch of mid-range, and you hear it on Suffragette City and Ziggy Stardust. And
I would love to know. You can tell me this, Jim.
That wacky sound.
What was he doing on the outro of Panic in Detroit? Which was...
I'm not familiar with it enough.
Oh, it's a great song. It was actually inspired by Iggy Pop and what he relayed to David Bowie about Detroit. But it's more of a straightforward hard rocker than what the Stooges were doing. Yeah. But there's this outro that Ronson plays in the song. I don't know what he's doing, but it is really unbelievable to listen to.
All right, Shannon, is it time for your Rod Stewart reference yet?
Nope. That's number 1.
I gotta wait.
Number 2, Nuno Betancourt from Extreme.
Good choice.
It's funny because I went back. I didn't really have to, but I did. I went back, listened to Pornography, which is the second album, famous for More Than Words, Wholehearted. But I went back and re-listened to that because that probably is one of my favorite albums of all time. It's just a great record from beginning to end. And I went back and I listened to it when I was walking the dogs. That's how I do my research. I was just listening to it, and so many of those songs, it's like he's the one guy that's more of what I call the million notes a second kind of player. But under so many of those songs, especially on that album, like underneath like regular verses of the song, it's like he's playing little mini solos underneath them, but it fits within the course of the song, and he's able to keep the rhythm of the song. And yeah, that album from beginning to end, there's not a bad song on it. Say what you will about the ballads, but again, a different approach. Even Wholehearted is more of a country feel to it. Then, when Extreme, wasn't on the road, he spent many years playing with Rihanna. So he's more multifaceted. I think with Rihanna, it was probably a big help too. Not only that he could play guitar and play any type of guitar, but he also can sing, obviously, because he did the background vocals on More Than Words. He's a great singer. And the interesting thing was, I think it was on the Eddie Trunk show, I heard Nuno Bettencourt talking about his experience with Eddie Van Halen when he met Eddie Van Halen the first time, because he did an interview for like Guitar Magazine, and in the interview they asked him, said, "Why don't you do the finger tap like Eddie Van Halen does?" And Nuno goes, "It's just really played out." And
yeah, he's right.
Nuno says, "I don't do it because it's just really played out," and everybody does it.
He's right.
So
right.
So I don't do it, and he obviously wasn't bagging on what Eddie had done, but more so what everybody was doing at the time. So fast forward a few months, and he's with one of his friends. His friend's like, "I got to stop by and see Eddie real quick." And he's like, "Eddie Van Halen?" Is yeah. So he's like, "I forgot about this interview." I go in and, and I see Eddie's rig, and I'm like, I always wanted to know how he got that tone. So, I get introduced, I meet Eddie, they're talking, doing their business. And Eddie's like, "Go play on my rig if you want." So he's like, I went over and played on his rig, and I plugged in, and all of a sudden I'm thinking I'm going to sound just like Eddie Van Halen. He's like, but I still sounded like Nuno Bettencourt with Eddie Van Halen's rig, because that's who I am. And you just can't duplicate that. He's like, but in the course, I'm wired into Eddie stuff, so I decided to do a little finger tap. And Eddie's like, "Stop!" And Nuno goes, "What?" And he's like, "That's played out. Don't do that finger tap." He obviously had read the article.
Yeah, I actually don't think he sounds anything like Eddie Van Halen. And I'm not a huge Extreme fan, but I know he's a great guitar player. You can obviously just tell his chops are ridiculous. But he also played with Perry Farrell's Satellite Party.
Yeah, he's played on a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, so
I'm not a huge Extreme person either, because of I don't necessarily like seeing them live, because for some reason I don't like watching Gary Cherone. I had breakfast with Gary Cherone once. I was at the next table over, but
the controversial third singer of Van Halen.
Yeah, that album's not bad either. It's not a bad album, but it's just not Van Halen.
Yeah, I've heard some of his stuff on the Satellite Party. That was really good. And Perry Farrell, of course, he was the most known for being the front man of Jane's Addiction. That was his show, but Perry's that kind of guy who doesn't really care what kind of background you have. Dave Navarro had a metal background. He's going to use you. If you're a great player, he's going to get you to do what he wants you to do. But he knew how great of a player. And of course, he just lost my train of thought. Bettencourt sounds nothing like he did on Extreme on the Satellite Party record. He's actually playing with the bass player from Joy Division.
Right.
It's also on that band. So, he's a great all-around player for sure.
So I moved him all the way up to number 2 just based upon the strength of that second Extreme album, because I just absolutely love that album. And the albums that have followed, not a super big fan of. The first album's okay. It wasn't the production's not great on it. They had an album in 2009 a live album called Take Us Alive, and it's a great record because it's got the best of all those albums, and I think none of those albums are really solid except for the second one.
All right, another great choice. Liking all these choices by you guys tonight. So great job. Number ones. I struggled with this, putting this guy as my number one, but there was probably never any doubt. Been my favorite guitar player for a while now. Talked about him on the show, probably ad infinitum, probably too much. You know, a guy played with Michael Jackson, Boz Scaggs, Lionel Richie, George Benson, Olivia Newton-John, plays guitar on Physical, plays the riff on Beat It, that, of course, you know, another good friend of Eddie Van Halen's, and that's Steve Lukather. This is Toto's first album. Not as hard rocking as some of their other albums. Hydra, I think, is a little more hard rocking album. The seventh one, a little more hard rocking album than that one. So, you know, you can kind of pigeonhole him into that pop category, but, you know, his solo stuff is all hard rock. And the guy literally played with everybody in the 80s. And not only is he just a fantastic guitar player, he's a great songwriter, a producer, and an incredible singer, too. You know, he sings a lot of Toto's ballads, and, you know, I think they've had great singers, but I think he's a better singer than some of the singers that they've had over the years. So that's my number one, Steve Lukather. Luke, I don't think that's any surprise to anybody if they've watched any of our shows in the past who was going to be my number one. So,
okay. Yeah, I'm not surprised because we did an episode. You had Toto as your favorite album of 1982, I believe. Yep. So I remember that. Yeah. And so my number one, pretty easy choice, really, and a lot of it is based upon just the adventurous nature of his playing, the massive influence. He is the most influential guitarist on my list. He's the most technical player on my list, although Vernon Reid would give him a bit of a run, I think. More technical than Alex Lifeson or Robbie Krieger or even Mick Ronson. I'm sure the Vernon Reid was influenced by this guy. He is responsible for, in my opinion, probably the most important debut album of all time. Not my favorite, but probably one of my three favorites, and that is going to be Robert Fripp.
On my honorable mention.
Okay, a lot of people who listen to metal aren't familiar with this guy. And he's not like straight metal by any means, but he's certainly prog metal at times. And this is probably his most famous progressive metal record, and that is Red. This record was a very big influence on Nirvana's Kurt Cobain, which I find completely bizarre. But when I read it, Cobain's not a technical player. Fripp is about as technical as you can get. But what's really cool about Robert Fripp is he completely shuns the blues. More than any guitar player, just unbelievably innovative. And it really goes back to the first record. Everyone knows this one, or they should know the cover of this. It's one of the most famous covers of all time, and that is In the Court of the Crimson King. I'd like to thank, if Eric Miller is watching the show tonight, thank you. Eric Miller sent this to me from Chicago quite some time ago, the original Atlantic U.S. version of this album. It's, the only heavy song on this record really is 21st Century Schizoid Man. The rest of it is more laid back. But 21st Century Schizoid Man is a very heavy track. It was covered, I believe, by Ozzy Osbourne on his big box set he did way back then. But it's proto-progressive metal. It's as heavy as anything on Led Zeppelin 2, if not heavier. It's got a sax in it, which might distract some people who are like metal or hard rock purists, but it's a heavy song. But there are heavy songs all over the King Crimson catalog, like Lark's Tongue and Aspic on the third record. Red is, half the record is very heavy, including the title track, Red, which is an instrumental. One of the greatest instrumentals of all time. One More Red Nightmare, and of course Starless, which, as beautiful as it is, has some very heavy passages in it. Then as we go into the modern era, King Crimson in the 80s went in kind of a new wave direction on Discipline. And there's just an unbelievable instrumental on here called, I believe it's called, The Sheltering Sky. One of my 5 favorite instrumentals of all time. It's not a heavy track like the instrumental Red on the album Red or Lark's Tongue and Aspic. But as we move forward from this, going into the 90s, King Crimson starts to get really heavy again. I don't have any of those albums. I have heard them.
Hope we're not losing Jeff.
Yeah, your internet's bad, Jeff.
Jeff, you're in some sort of a funk.
Records are all they're progressive metal. If you listen to Tool, they pretty much took their style from King Crimson, bottom line. And we also have later The Power to Believe, I believe from 2003. I think that's the name of the record, has a very heavy track called Level 5. So there's heavy stuff all over the catalog. But if you take that into consideration with all this ambient work and Frippertronics, all the stuff that he's done with other people like David Bowie and Peter Gabriel and Blondie and even Daryl Hall, Robert Fripp's an easy number one. He's one of the greatest he's one of my 5 favorite guitarists of all time, period, not just hard rock metal guitarists.
I saw Daryl Hall about a month ago, and he talked about his relationship with Robert Fripp and everything and doing that album. He was doing a lot of stuff from his solo catalog, and he did a couple songs from that album he did with Fripp. So just released the box set of his, I guess would be his debut solo album. They released that in an anniversary box set type of thing. So, yeah, Fripp, we couldn't hear for a minute. You were you cut out on us. Was in some sort of cyber no man's land or something. But did you mention the album Thrack?
Yes, I did. It's a pretty heavy record.
Yeah, not one of their more accessible records, I would say. Not one of their more critical darlings, but yeah, it's definitely a heavy. I like that album.
I love Coda Marine 475. I could listen to that song on repeat. It's just an instrumental, but there's something, it's like really subaquatic, ominous.
Yeah.
A very ominous sound. There's actually a video on YouTube where Fripp and like 40 of his disciples play Coda Marine 475. They're all playing it at the same time. It's really fascinating. But yeah, the guy's completely innovative. I would argue that after Jimi Hendrix, he's probably the second most innovative guitarist I've ever heard.
Yeah.
After Hendrix, that's my argument anyway. So he's my number one.
Good choice. On my honorable mentions. So, Dr. Kelley.
Yeah, number one, John Lowry, also known as John 5. Just an absolute great guitarist. Has done stuff with Rod Stewart in the past. Has done stuff with K.D. Lang. Way more famous for his work in Marilyn Manson, Rob Zombie, which those are not heavy. Those are not bands where there's a lot of lead playing. But then when you go back to the stuff that he did with the DLR band, which was different from David Lee Roth solo, there was one album called the DLR band. These songs that David Lee Roth keeps leaking and putting out, not the Van Halen covers, but the other original works that he's been leaking out over the last 6 months or so. John Lowry was on all those songs as well. He's just a great player, and he's probably got 10 solo albums. If you can pull up a YouTube clip, he does mashups in the middle of his solo shows with the Creatures, and just does mashups of songs. And it'll play 8-10 different snippets of songs. Just a great player. He's another one of those falls into line with.
Did you say the Creatures?
John 5 and the Creatures. It's not the Creatures you're thinking of.
Okay, all
right. But another one like Ace Frehley and Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson. He's very flamboyant in the way he plays. Lots of fun guitars. And yeah, just a great player. He's just a great player. And he played on my favorite Marilyn Manson album, Holy Wing. So that
I didn't mean to go into this, but the reason I ask is because the bass player for the live bass player for the Creatures, during one of their eras he actually later played in Marilyn Manson, and I can't think of his name, but he played.
Ramirez?
No, that's not his name. He's brown. He was the bass player.
Tim Skold.
I don't know his name, but he played with the Creatures, and he later played before he played with Marilyn Manson.
I think it's Tim Skold. Skold. I think
he's going from one kind of music to the other, but he's obviously, that's why I got confused. So
yeah, Shannon, that was a great choice. That's somebody I've always wanted to explore some of their catalog, and I'm going to start doing that. Always kind of seen him, and he's a Telecaster player, and I'm a big fan of the Telecaster. Started out as a country player, didn't he?
Oh, I'm not aware of that. Yeah, I'm not aware of that. I mean, most of his early stuff was with David Lee Roth. He was also in Rob Halford's second post-Judas Priest band, too, which was an industrial band.
Really?
Yeah, yes. I thought I read somewhere that he got his beginnings playing in clubs as a country player.
Yeah, and he might have. I mean, he could play everything.
Yeah.
He's got a great Instagram page called Nights in Satan's Service because he is the biggest Kiss collection of any human alive.
And there was our Rod Stewart reference we were waiting for. So.
Second Rod Stewart reference.
Yeah. All right, great choices, everybody. Anybody honorable mentions that weren't mentioned?
You want to go first? I've got a few. I'll just run them off real quick.
Yeah, I'll just go real quick. I was going to do this. I was thinking about toying with this because I said I was going to take some liberties, but I think I was considering going 5 Gus G, 4 Joe Holmes, 3 Jake E. Lee, 2 Zakk Wylde, number 1 Randy Rhoads, just doing all Ozzy guitarists. But I didn't go that route. Plus, I couldn't have done Randy Rhoads on this list because it's way too famous.
Yeah.
Because I try to stay away from that stuff, because there's a lot of guys that I like the way they play, like George Lynch. I thought that's way too famous. I even thought Warren D. Martini's a little bit too famous for what I was trying to accomplish.
I'm going to mention my 2 other debut album choices here. Tom Scholz, of course, Boston's first album.
Yeah, that album's great.
All their albums, with the exception of maybe like 1 or 2, but their first 4, definitely. The guy's just an incredible player and a genius too. And not sure if it qualifies for hard rock, but I'm going to put him in there. Elliot Easton.
He's a great guitar player for sure. He's a great player. I don't think it qualifies as hard rock personally, but he's a great player.
Yeah. I
love his solo on Since You've Been Gone. I love that solo. That's just very tasty stuff.
Yep. Some others I had more from the fusion: John McLaughlin, Mahavishnu, Alan Holdsworth, with Tony Williams' Lifetime, as well as others. Al Di Meola, also from the fusion spectrum. Bernie Marsden, talked about him before. A new guy on the scene. I'm not a big shredder guy, but Guthrie Govan and this CD, the Aristocrat CD, this is incredible. This is the best music I've heard in the last 20 years by these guys. This incredible heavy metal, prog metal fusion type of music. Steve Morris, who I've mentioned before, with Deep Purple, Kansas, the Dixie Dregs, the Steve Morris Band. Stevie Ray Vaughan, I think, warrants at least a little bit of attention on here. Michael Schenker.
He's definitely hard rock, sure.
UFO. Got the Lights Out album over here somewhere from UFO. Of course, no hard rock, heavy metal. Go without mentioning.
Yeah, Brian May.
Good Dr. Brian May. Adrian Vandenberg, another album I've talked about before on here. Richie.
For sure.
Warren Haynes, another newer guy on the scene.
Yeah.
Brothers, Government Mule. And Frank.
Yep.
Yeah,
Hot Rats.
Yeah, the one that I really toyed with that probably would have been my number one, but again, it's another one of those bands that's too country for rock, too rock for country, but it's Charlie Starr from Blackberry Smoke. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That guy's amazing.
He's good. He's really
He's
good.
another one that can sing and play and does both. Blackberry Smoke's here Friday night. I'm highly considering. I went
Really?
a couple years ago, right before the pandemic started. It was just blown away. But I really love their stuff. The Whippoorwill is just.
Yeah, I like their stuff too. A couple other ones that I don't have stuff by. Paul Kossoff from Free, another just tone monster with his 59 Les Paul. Tony Iommi, of course. I mean, what hard rock, heavy metal guitarist can go without the godfather of them?
Yeah,
He's the godfather.
And
the tritone, the devil's note.
One that I thought of when I was telling the Frank Marino story about his acid trip and meeting the spirit of Jimi Hendrix, who taught him a bunch of stuff about guitar. I remembered another great guitar player and vocalist too, and another member of a power trio, Mark Farner.
Oh yeah,
acid trip led him to find Jesus and get born again. So. Reminded me of that.
Yeah, Mark Farner's one of those ones that I heard a lot of famous guitarists talk about, and then I went back and listened to it myself, and I understood what they were talking about.
Yeah, great player. Anybody else we haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I'm going to give her mine real quick, and a lot of these are really big names. Pete Townsend, for sure. He's the greatest songwriting hard rock player.
I didn't think of him.
Greatest songwriter as far as a hard rock player that's ever existed. This is pretty much common knowledge, but it's true. Behind Blue Eyes is, it's one of the greatest lyrical songs ever recorded. That's just one of many. Jimmy Page, he bowed the guitar first. He also is responsible for a great guitar piece on In the Evening. He's going to be an honorable mention. Brian May, as you mentioned, obviously the king of the layered guitar sound, which has been used by so many people. In the future, beyond him, most notably the Smashing Pumpkins, who I think really were indebted to Queen in particular. Ritchie Blackmore, Highway Star, and Space Truckin' are great guitar pieces, as is all of Rainbow's Rising. Jeff Beck as well, more for his solo work more than anything. I enjoy listening to him as a solo act. I want to hear him play guitar. I don't necessarily want to hear anyone sing when he's playing guitar. Frank Zappa, similar situation. I love Hot Rats. I do own that. I think Hot Rats is fantastic. Great guitar work. Kirk Hammett, that might surprise some people, but I love Sanitarium. That's an incredible song. That's probably my favorite Metallica song. I like the trippy nature of that song. I've always liked Sanitarium. Couple guys that my roots, so to speak. George Lynch, I did want to mention him. Just Got Lucky is a fantastic solo. He's probably the best solo guy outside of Eddie Van Halen during that period. Played a really melodic lead. He also happened to play Just Got Lucky when a volcano was about to blow in the video. He gets special mention just for that. That volcano where they were filming that thing was going to explode, and he's playing guitar like right an hour before the thing erupts. Extra points for that. That's awesome. Also, Warren D Martini, I want to mention him as well. I think Lay It Down is one of the nastiest riffs I've ever heard. That is a great riff. I always liked Invasion of Your Privacy more than Out of the Cellar. That was the best Rat record. And a couple guys, heavier rock players from the modern rock world. Dave Navarro, Jane's Addiction. He's a very exciting player. 3 Days in particular is one of the greatest solos I've ever heard. From Ritual, De Lo Habitual. That is absolutely epic. And also Kim Thayil of Soundgarden. I love what he does. I think he's very underrated. He doesn't really play leads like a Navarro or a Jerry Cantrell. He's more kind of almost like somewhere he's kind of sits in between Tony Iommi and Sonic Youth, his style. It's hard to explain. He plays these tweaked out psychedelic solos with a lot of dissonance. And he plays a heavy drop D tuning Tony Iommi style sludge that leads into those tweaked out psychedelic solos. And also Tony Iommi himself, of course. the godfather of metal. Those are my honorable mentions.
Yeah, that's I like the way Kim Thale plays too.
It's fantastic.
I was the rare person that really didn't like Cornell's voice all that much.
Kim Thale is by far my favorite guitarist out of Seattle, by far.
Yeah. So I mean, I toyed with Cantrell a little bit too because I really like what he does on almost all the Alice in Chains, and I think they've got music that crosses over all kinds of gamuts.
He's a pretty melodic player.
And there's some new women on this scene. Not really all that. I mean, Lizzie Hale's been on the scene for a while from Hailstorm. She can really play. Nita Strauss, who was in Alice Cooper for a while and is now out with Demi Lovato, she can really play. She was also the Rams guitarist, stadium guitarist last year in LA. So, she can really play. But it's like kids. I mean, there's so many. There's just so many that I just absolutely love.
Yeah, didn't she do something at the Super Bowl?
Yeah. Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah, and a couple people that didn't qualify for me that I really love. David Gilmour. He was kind of a tweener, kind of like Robbie Krieger. But I think Krieger really does qualify. I don't think Gilmour qualifies. There's not enough material in their catalog, I think, to warrant his inclusion as a hard rock player. Also, Thurston Moore and Lee Renaudo of Sonic Youth. They don't really play riffs. It's in a way it is heavy. It's like a wash of dissonance, but it's not riff based. So I couldn't include them. And also Kevin Shields of My Bloody Valentine, similar to the Sonic Youth guys. It's not riff based. It's like a wash of dissonance, but I really love what he does. But those are four players who theoretically could have been included, but I said no because it's not riff based.
Yeah, and you guys' list, like Gary Moore could have qualified for my list, and I actually toyed with that a little bit. Frank Marino probably could have qualified too. Vernon Reid definitely could have qualified. Vernon Reid was great when I've only seen Livy Color once live. And
incredibly technical player, really technical.
It was a dirty, sweaty rock and roll show. It was a great show.
Well, guys, great show tonight. You guys gave me some stuff, some homework I need to do here. Some people I need to listen to and check out, and hopefully I did the same for you. So join us in 2 weeks. We're going to be going over our top 5 favorite albums that turned 45 this year. So it'll be albums from 1977. We've done 72, 82, and 87, so we're going back to 77 for this one, 45-year-old album. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. Again, like and subscribe to our channel. Make sure you comment. We'd love to hear who your favorite 5 heavy metal and hard rock guitarists, not named Eddie or Jimi, are.
Jimmy Duster wants to know who your favorites are. So please like and subscribe and give us your opinions on our choices and also your own.
And I'm just a guest. I don't care who your favorites are. Because y'all wrong. There's only one to rate.
And